Hey there, this is a tutorial on functions in Python. Thought I'd give a quick example to make it easier to do functions. Um, I have a blank Python file that has 3 commented sections. The first being the top where the import modules are usually defined, and those are the functions that are external to the program. And so in this case, I'm going to use a math module. You can use as many modules as you want, and you're going to have to explore inside the documentation on how to implement the functions inside the math module. Next thing I want to do is make a custom function. This function is going to be called circle area, and you see that it has a parameter as an input. These parentheses are what determine where the input parameters to the function, and in this case there's just one input parameter. Then I'm going to set up the body of the function. In this case, the circle area function is going to calculate the area of a circle, and so it's going to put the area into a temporary variable called area, and it does the math. You get the absolute value or the accurate value for pi. You could use 3.14, but this gives you a little more accurate value, times the radius times the radius. You could use a square function, but this is just a little easier to read. And so that's all this function does. It's pretty basic. And the next thing we need to do is return the area back to the calling function. So that's it. So now the last section of Python is the main function body. And even though it doesn't look like this is a function, it really is. And so everything at the first column or with no indent is what gets run as the main function, which is the first. So let's set up a little program to call your main. First I want to make a variable called myRadius and assign it to the value 5. Then I want to call the circle area function and passing it myRadius and returning my area, which is the area that I'm going to, where is the variable that I'm using to store the area that's returned. So that's really all this program needs to do. The last thing here is to print out the area. So in this case, I print the value of my radius and the value of my area. And just to show you a little different way, if you decided that you didn't want to take the step of storing the value of my area in a separate variable, you can call the function inline. You see how this function's getting called inside the print statement, and because it automatically substitutes the return value, it will essentially do the same thing. Let's run this module. You want to save it. And you can see that it calculated the area of the radius 5 circle. And both of these prints were identical. So hopefully this gives you a little good tutorial on how to implement functions. The other thing I wanted to show you is to kind of prove that the main function body is really a function. Another way that you could set up is you could make a function called main, and indent it, and then when you went to run your program, it wouldn't automatically run because the Python interpreter doesn't know to run main. But if you type main, just like you would type any program that you wanted to, any function that you would wanted to run, it will execute. So this, sometimes Python, they try to hide some of the function aspects of it, and it's hard to know whether you're in your main code or in your functions. So try to keep them separate using things like comments and tricks to just have your mind know that variables are separated, because variables, the variable names aren't shared inside of the functions. And you could get a variable name and have the same variable name used in a function, but the computer treats those as totally two different variables that could or could not have a link. One other thing I thought I'd show off, if you were where'd it go? Interested in doing C# programming, which is another programming language that's used by Microsoft. Kind of see how there's similar techniques for defining functions. This is the same function, circle area, that gets past the radius. You notice how you have to give it a lot more information. Double tells it that it's a decimal number. It's a fancy way of saying decimal. And it has to, you have to tell it that you're returning a double as well, which is the area. But the math is pretty much the same. And the main function here is pretty similar. You define your radius, you define your area, you pass the radius into it, and then you print it out. So in Microsoft's C# language, spaces don't matter. Spaces are essentially ignored by the compiler, and instead it uses curly braces to separate where your functions are. So all the code between these curly braces are in the main function. All the code in between the curly braces up here are part of the circle area function. So it's good to see the same code implemented in two different ways, and sometimes programming languages have strengths and weaknesses based on their syntax. That's all. Thanks for listening.